Hi, everybody. Welcome to Apocalypse Podcast, your source for all news and distractions during this COVID-19 outbreak. We're in week 2 of the apocalypse here, and let's check and see how things are going government-wise. So, my boy JT, he did his announcement today. Anybody who knows me knows my opinion on JT. I'm generally not a fan of our prime minister there. He's done some good things. He's done some things I like opening up the borders to refugees. That was a good call. But generally, my opinion of the guy is he got in based on his name and his hair, and that's proved to be evident pretty much throughout. One thing I gotta say though, I do think this government is handling this crisis pretty well, all things considered. I think that a lot of what's happening has been good. A lot of the measures being put into place have been good. Are they enough? Probably not. There's probably more to be done, but seem to be reacting pretty well. So the new narrative has been about economic stimulus. This is not uncommon in a time of crisis. During a war, you'll sell war bonds to try to funnel money into the government. During, of course, the Great Depression, there was the New Deal and all these back-to-work programs. And even my boy JT, during his first term, his platform was to run a series of, I think it was 3 modest deficits. It's very much a liberal MO. Very much, you could say his father did the same thing. So it's, but stimulus spending works. It does work. Reinvesting in your people, reinvesting in your economy. And that was very much on brand, on message today. He was basically saying that we have money set aside in the case of emergencies. I think the quote he said was, we've put some money aside for a rainy day and now it's raining. So there is money being invested. There's, of course, the emergency relief fund. It's $2,000 a month for, I think, 4 months. If you haven't applied to this on the CRA right now, go do so. I highly encourage you to go do so. I did it the other day. I'm just waiting for my password. And this is basically for people across the board. Pretty much, it's an out of work fund. There's EI, of course. Sadly, not a lot of people apply for EI, especially if you do contract work or precarious position work. So what I'm hoping is that these new provisions will kind of set up a precedent that basically exposes people who aren't covered by traditional social services. And the job market ain't what it used to be. You can't go be a lifer at a company anymore. Everybody's doing multiple jobs. Everybody's got a side hustle. Nobody's been able to save. It's impossible to save up for a house now. It's impossible to live in major urban centers and major city centers. It's been that way for a long time. I'm hoping, if anything good comes of this crisis, it'll get governments actually thinking about how can we actually make life livable for our citizens, because it hasn't been for a long time. I was struggling with the job market even before COVID hit, and then when it did hit, it's just, hey, I've already been going through this, guys. This is what it means to be in precarious work. So a lot of restaurant workers, service workers, arts workers, all hurting right now. Anyone who this business involves around social gatherings, that's what are dealing with. And it's you're dependent on people, you're dependent on customers, you're dependent on physical interactions, and people in these lines of work, of course. I mean it extends as well, right, to businesses, to film industry shut down. Teachers are out of work right now. And it's having an impact. It certainly is. So in terms of the emergency relief fund, obviously I approve. People are going to be out of work. People need to live. People need groceries. People need to eat. There's measures in place to lessen the impact. There's interest-free loans being given out right now. People are obviously, if people are going to be able to pay back the loans ever, that's going to be a concern. but they're also urging banks to be more lenient on late fees and late payments and things like that. And because basically nobody has income coming in right now. The economy is taking a hit. Nobody has income coming in right now. So you're charging people who don't have money. So a lot of these initiatives are in place, and today's initiative was basically a stimulus package for small businesses. Something interesting came up in this speech where part of the Prime Minister's messaging was encouraging people to operate with it on good faith, to take that money for the small businesses, to take that money and put it back into the pockets of the workers. I think it's about a 75% relief. So for wage laws to cover the wages of employees, and basically urging small businesses to do the right thing and use that money to pay their employees instead of paying themselves. So, and it was interesting because the Prime Minister was pressed on that as to the security or the accountability of that. Like, how can you account that this is actually where this money is going to be used? Why do you need to urge businesses to act on good faith if there are measures in place? So it does, from that perspective, looks like it can be something that can be abused. I mean, if a business has an opportunity to profit itself and not profit its employees in this climate, it tends to do that. As I say, power corrupts. Absolutely. So I have no doubt this thing will be abused in some way. How easy that is, it's hard to tell, though, because we've seen a lot of good behavior from people, but we've seen also a lot of bad behavior from people acting out of their own self-interests, people doing really stupid things, people continuing to gather, people continuing to act in ways that are contrary to how we should be helping out each other right now. So but we've seen the reverse of that. We've also seen people banding and coming together, so it's hard to see. So just a little more about this wage subsidy. On Monday, Trudeau announced that any Canadian business whose revenue had decreased by 30% or more due to the pandemic will be eligible for the 75% wage subsidy promised, regardless of the number of employees they have. So that's interesting. It's kind of a catch-all without a requirement, it looks like, in terms of employees. But it looks like they're also targeting with that people who actually have been running at a loss. Like, you can't just apply if, I just want this free government money. It's no, you have to prove there's a loss there, and at least a 30% loss. This comes after Friday's announcement of the major increase. This is CTV News, by the way. CTV News just released today, to the wage subsidy for small and medium-sized businesses aimed at helping then keep employees on staff. Charities and not-for-profit organizations are also able to apply, as well as big companies, big and small, the Prime Minister said Monday, which is today. I was thinking they were talking about last Monday. I don't know why that was. But yeah, it's essentially, to keep employees on staff, to keep them paid, to keep them employed. This is about making sure that people are still getting paid, whether they work for a business that employs 10 people or 100 people, Trudeau said, noting that many have had to get creative to keep money coming in. A wage subsidy is being backdated to March 15th and is an increase to initial commitment of a 10% subsidy that comes alongside a special emergency guaranteed business loan of up to $40,000, as well as a deferral of customs duties, HST, and GST payments. So we've seen, it's interesting, they started out by making sure kind of the little guy, the individuals, that they're covered under EI, they're covered under the emergency relief. There was a small business loan. I think it was about $750 or something like that for small businesses that came out a little while ago. And this program looks more to target, because Trudeau said a little while ago, maybe it was a couple of days ago, that we need to be doing more for business, doing more to shore up the economy, doing more to ensure that small businesses are supported right now. So it's interesting that now today they're talking about this, kind of going further ahead with it. Obviously, you need to do all of it, right? You know, if there's not a strong economy, people won't be employed. But if people can't pay their rent, if they can't eat, then people can't. It doesn't matter beyond that. If you shoot your workforce in the foot, you don't have any workforce to work for you. So it's interesting that they did that. They started out with essentially helping individuals, and now they're moving on to businesses. I think it's probably a wise strategy. So subsidy will be the first. Will be on the first about 60,000 earned, or just under $900 a week. The announcement comes with a warning from Trudeau to businesses not to misuse the program or they'll face serious consequences. This is where we talk about shows of good faith and accountability that he mentioned. He also encouraged companies who can still afford to pay their employees their full salaries or the 25% not covered by the government to do so. Every dollar of this should go to workers, Trudeau said. And this unprecedented situation calls for unprecedented action, and it calls for good faith and trust between everyone involved. Yeah, so there will be some. Okay, this is where we get into the nitty gritty of it, which is where I have some issues. There will be some form of verification program put in place to monitor the use of this aid in the coming weeks, the Prime Minister said. Some form of verification program put in place to monitor the use of this aid in the coming weeks. Yeah, this thing is going to get abused. It is going to get abused. I see a lot of businesses skimming off the top. I see that money for workers going to other programs. What kind of verification program is going to be put in place? It looks like they don't even have an idea. Some form of verification program in place. But here's the thing about this decision. I don't really know a adequate solution. It might be some kind of a reporting. It might be some kind of, you have to submit your ROE to make sure that people are actually getting paid. If employees have a direct deposit or check number, having a record of that. I don't know how they could verify all of that record keeping. That seems like a lot, especially when there's other things like increasing the testing for COVID-19, which they're talking about right now. So I don't know how much a government watchdog would be able to basically verify all of this is happening, all of this is going on. So that's the thing. Verification, that's difficult. It's difficult to do. It's difficult to keep track of all of that. But to go at it relying on people's good faith, business good faith. No, that's something that's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. Businesses have there is maybe a smaller business with a smaller team where, the employer is working directly with the employees, that kind of a thing. Like, obviously, like a smaller organization like that, you'd have to have good faith because you're relying on these people almost like a family, a mom and pop store, something like that. But in many times it is family. But for a larger business, you're talking about 100 workers being able to, in an organization, your boss is faceless at that point, and they have no incentive to, if there's no proper reporting in place, there is no incentive for them to give you that money. They're a business at the end of the day. They want to protect their own interests over that of their employees. So I hope whatever verification they have in place is more than just some form of verification. I hope it's more outlined. And that was the thing I was getting even before going to this article. It really wasn't outlined how that was going to be verified. And that's the thing. One of the worst times for workers to get screwed over again would be right now. Again, that's workers getting screwed over, the little guy getting screwed over. That's what led to 2008. And now we're in an economic situation that's looking that bad, if not worse, than 2008. So this would be the exact wrong time to give money to businesses. That's not going to be going towards workers. So not a big fan of that, but it could just be kind of reactionary. They're trying to get policies in place. They're trying to get programs in place daily. It does seem like they're trying to make certain strides daily. Some days the message from Redo Cottage doesn't have really anything new to say. But sometimes there are new policies being put in place. Even with the CRA, with the Emergency Release Fund, It launches on April 6th, and people are being told to sign up now for it. So there's the program in place for it. They're basically releasing it before they've actually got the infrastructure in place, which I understand. You need to kind of get the ball rolling, hit the ground running. The problem is when you do that, when you don't have something solid in place and you launch before you have the framework all worked out, there's the possibility for it to fall apart. And if there isn't good accountability in place, and I think we do need to be watching businesses more than ever right now to make sure they're not screwing over their workers when everybody is self-interested right now, that could be a big, big problem if proper monitoring systems aren't in place. So that's something that they really need to iron out. They really need to get their ducks in a row on. So travel restrictions still in effect. It's to the effect, we heard this about a day or two ago, where flights and trains, they're inspecting people. Part of the inspection process is they're basically trying to vet and root out anybody who has COVID-like symptoms. In boarding trains or boarding planes and flights, you shouldn't really be traveling by flight anywhere. Well, I guess there's still domestic flights, but I mean, the country is essentially in lockdown right now, except for, businesses and things like that. Again, I think it's more, it seems to be more like a question thing. People just asking, do you have symptoms, like trying to get you to self-report. I'm not sure. Maybe just the act of them doing so will act like a deterrent. But if you got a cold and you need to travel somewhere, you're gonna lie, right? So I'm not sure how effective it will be. It's interesting thing happened in the province where I live today in Ontario. Is actually let me bring up the article on that. So Rob Ford, or is it Doug? I always confuse the two. Not the crack one, the other one. So let's bring this up here. So what's our time now? So Saturday, Ford had a press conference that announced a ban on gatherings of 5 people and fines for businesses found to be price gouging. That's good because I've seen that happening. I've seen the price gouging happening at certain stores. You go in somewhere, hand sanitizer, which is an essential item, I would argue, for like $13 when it would be like $3 before, $6 before, depending on the size of the bottle. So that's definitely happening. There's definitely price gouging going on. So I'm glad they're cracking down on it. You also see like inflated prices of toilet paper here and there, $20 for a 20 pack and things like that. So it's good that that's happening. The ban on gatherings of 5 people. I don't like it, but I'm not necessarily against it. I think, it's, you've heard it again and again, flattening the curve, flattening the curve, flattening the curve. But yeah, and people aren't listening to that. There's still large gatherings happening. You see reports of that happening. In Nova Scotia, people were going to the beach, and then that's when they had that restriction put in place by the premier, and he basically locked down the province. It's desperate times. It really is. I also think that it's something where it's sending a message. And it's sending the message that this is serious, take it seriously. Some people are going to still break this. They are. If, there's a gathering of 7 people or 10 people, is it really going to, well, maybe 10. I don't know. It's hard to say, but, so under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, anyone seen selling goods at unconscionable prices could face everything from a $750 ticket to an individual fine of $100,000. Director of a corporation convicted of gouging could be fined up to $500,000, and the corporation itself could face a fine of $10 million. Good. I agree with that. The one thing is, if it's, a local outlet and the manager of that local outlet is seen to be operating and fixing prices. How much is that really at the behest of the CEO? That said, that forces managers of large corporations to, from the top down, put an basically crack down on price gouging within, because you don't want to be hit with that $10 million fine if you're running things. I mean, you don't want to be hit with any of these amounts, really. Nobody really has money right now, but yeah, it's oh wow, $30 for Lysol wipes at a store near Avenue Road and Lawrence Avenue. Yup. That's wrong. That's wrong. It's just like, you know what? It's just like hoarding in wartime. You don't do that. Like, it's a societal crisis going on right now. People, you don't, like, I know everybody's having a hard time making ends meet. The person you're gouging is now not going to is now in a hard position. So basically, you've put all of your monetary troubles on someone else by doing something that's well, frankly, now illegal, and just immoral to begin with. So I don't have sympathize. I don't sympathize. It's opportunism. It's renegade capitalism. I can understand where a small business would feel like they have to go that route, but if you do go that route, I have no sympathy for you if you get hit by one of these fines. I just don't. You're basically taking it out on other members of your society who are in need, and that's not what we need right now. So I've got no sympathy for you, and I think these corporate fines will help with that, because from the corporate level down, I think they will start to mandate internal policies that say, hey, no price fixing. If we do that, we'll police you internally, because you don't want to be hit with that fine. So and also, Ford asks anybody who witnessed gouging to call Consumer Protection Ontario at 1-800-889-9768. Great. So there's a number you can call if you see price gouging, and I highly encourage this. You see somebody price gouging, yeah, just let somebody know. I have seen that stores are stopping. What is it called? Price matching. That's happening. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think there's more important things that organizations need to be worried about. That said, that does set a precedent for price gouging. If we're not going to price match, that means that we can offer unreasonable prices. That said, if you see better prices somewhere else, you can still go, it's the supply of goods which might end up being a problem. The Act defines an unconscionable price as a price that grossly exceeds the price which similar goods are readily available. So that's worrying definition right there, because price at which similar goods are readily available. As certain goods become more in demand, as your toilet paper gets sold out, as your hand sanitizer gets sold out, if everybody starts gouging prices, does that mean it's okay now? And I don't think it does. I think we should be looking at pre-COVID prices for this, because I mean, just in terms of, like, you're gonna put people in a position where they won't be able to afford toilet paper. You fucking $30 for toilet paper. That's ridiculous. If everybody starts doing that, if that's where the goods are readily available, like, I can understand some inflation here and there, but if it's inflated to that extent and everybody starts doing it, then you can make the case where, well, hey, Bob down the street is doing that, so I'm doing that over here. I think that's a problem. I don't think we should be. I think we should be looking at prices where similarly available under pre-COVID conditions, under pre-lockdown conditions. I don't think there is any reason why the consumer should be getting gouged during this time when people frankly aren't able to go to work, they're not able to get a paycheck, and they still need the necessities. And hand sanitizer is a necessity. Toilet paper is a necessity, right? Like, there's no way these should be. It should be like vegetable pricing, where there's no tax on vegetables and foods like that, because they're a necessity. You need a necessity to live. It should be categorized as the same thing. Yeah. Oh, wow. Some people are $5 hand sanitizer being cited as gouged at $30. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah. No. So let's talk about these gatherings of 5 or more people. So Ontario has issued, and other places have issued this as well. We just talked about Nova Scotia earlier, something similar. Ontario has issued an emergency order under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. This is CP24, by the way, to prohibit organized events and social events of more than 5 people, effective immediately. The new order replaces the previous emergency order prohibiting organized public events of over 50 people. So it's been going down, right? So I remember when it was 250 people. I had a show that closed actually on that day when it was 250 people. And what was it, like 60 people in that audience, something like that. So we were still within the limits, but then it went down to 50 and now it's down to 5. And pretty soon it's going to be, the way it's going, it's going to be, nobody's allowed to leave the house. It's going to be like, in these places where you need to get a permit and only one family member can go out at a time. We had my aunt's birthday yesterday, and the way we celebrated it was very sad. We brought the muffins over, we brought a card and a gift over, we said hello at the door, but we couldn't hug, and we waved and we saw them at the door and we talked briefly, and it was so good to see my aunts again. It was so lovely to see them. Their smiles brought a smile to my heart. But oh man, just when you can't hug someone, that's when you just want to run up and hug them even more. It's tough. It's tough right now. It's so weird to be in a society where I mean, as closed off as we were before, as tied to our phones and whatnot before, to have that physical restriction of no, you have to keep your distance or you might die. Like it's so unnatural. And I think that's the thing about this pandemic is you being unable to gather, being unable to socialize. We're a social animal. We're a pack animal. We need our pack. I think the lovely thing is that through social media, it's actually bringing us together more in the sense that we're making time to go out of our way to talk to people. I've had a lot of it's been for business, but I've had a lot of communication and correspondence over social media, over platforms like Zoom and like Skype and things like that. I think Facebook Messenger even at one point. And it's been good still having that avenue to communicate with people. And I'm wondering too if some people are reaching out and they're connecting more with other individuals now than they would have been previously. I'm sure for some people that's the case, and I think for those people it's a good thing. But I think everybody's feeling right now we really need to get back to the point where we're connecting again physically in physical space. I want to be able to meet up for coffee with people again. I want to be able to go to rehearsals. I want to be able to just walk around without fear of everything. I was in a grocery store the other day. It was so odd, just everything was lined up. There were spaces along the floor to make sure that you were standing a meter apart from everybody, which is good. I'm glad they're doing that. The workers all wearing masks, a lot of the consumers wearing masks, and you start being really like, you don't want to touch things when you're there because you're aware of germs, and you're really aware of your spatial orientation to other people. Canada is interesting because of our population distribution. We tend to stand a little bit farther apart than our American counterparts. Like our kind of social bubble is a little bit bigger because we have a little more elbow room in this country. We just do. So it's interesting seeing that enforced. It's interesting seeing that as like a guideline. And like anytime I was like passing by someone, like it's a narrow aisle, I got to pass by to get this frozen fish or whatever, I'd be like, oh, I'm breaking the law. I'm breaking the rules. I'm part of the problem. But it's like even just having those thoughts in your head. And I don't know, walking by playground the other day, and the swings were tied up. There was caution tape around it, and there was a padlock on the swings so that kids can't go to the park anymore. It's so weird. It's so bizarre. And even last week, I was downtown for a meeting. I don't know, on Thursday, and just walking around for a little bit on what would normally be busy streets and being able to hear a pin drop. The one nice thing was the birds had come back that day. That was the first day I heard birds singing. And so spring is still happening despite what's happening with us and our species and COVID. But the world keeps turning. So I guess that's a positive thing right there. But let's get back to this 5-person ban. So parades, weddings, social gatherings, and communal services within places of worship are considered organized public events. Now, some organizations have been breaking this, and I think that's highly stupid. God doesn't want you to get sick. Stay home. Just pray at home. Like, come on. And in terms of everything else, it's really sad. One thing that's really sad is you can't really gather for funerals anymore as well. There's a distance there. You can't properly mourn. So that's anybody who's lost a loved one. I mean, my heart goes out to you, to not even be able to properly mourn from what's going on, and especially if it's because of this disease, as has been happening. That's really hard. It's a lot of people are having to do a lot of things that are very hard right now. So, I think it's everybody has things about their situation that they're pretty lucky in. I think it's important to focus on that right now, because there's a lot of people who are just dealing with ridiculous things going on, illnesses and death. And so if you are going through that, I'm very sorry. But for those of us who are luckier in that, I think that's something to take to heart, that things, as pessimistic as it sounds, that things aren't worse. If we're going to stop the spread of COVID-19 now and keep our community safe, we need to take extraordinary measures to ensure physical distancing, said Ford. I strongly encourage everyone to do the responsible thing and stay home unless absolutely necessary. I can assure everyone that we will do everything in our power to stop this virus in its tracks. So that's very Ford, very coming on, very strong. Very authoritative. But again, I'm not against this. This order does not apply to private households with 5 people or more. How could it? You're not going out. What are you going to do? Kick people out of their home? Ford said it would also not apply to child care centers supporting healthcare workers and first responders, given the number of individuals each center does not exceed 50 people. Funerals will be permitted to proceed with up to 10 people at one time, officials said. That's hard. Man, that is really hard. Like, you kind of want a big crowd of crying people at a funeral. You want a lot of people there to support, to say, hey, we loved this person and we're honoring their memory. 10 people at a time. I guess you could kind of like filter people in and out, but man, that is tough. That is tough. But I mean, I can't say I disagree, because it's protecting the lives of people who are still with us. I can't say I disagree with any of this. And I was a big skeptic the day before, 3 Mondays ago now, when this country officially went into lockdown, the word from Rito Hall, stay home. I was saying the day before, it seems to be overblown. 80% of people recover on their own, and people, the symptoms are not even as bad as the flu if you do get it, for most people. And I was kind of like, are we really? Like, businesses are shutting down, all of this kind of thing. And I'm like, they're protecting their bottom line is what they're doing. When businesses take action, I'm always like, okay, maybe. But I mean, it's kind of that double-edged sword, because a business wants to make money. That's its raison d'etre. That's why it exists. So for a business to voluntarily self-close is one thing, but then optics are another thing. Optics, of course, tie into how well your stock is doing on the market. But once it came from the government, once it came from Health Canada, honestly, even the World Health Organization, when they were saying, oh, this is a global pandemic and things like that, I'm kind of like, well, and it's because of the spread. It is. SARS was way more deadly than this when it hit this country, when it hit this province. Pretty much, you'd get it, you'd die. That's what would happen with SARS. But with SARS, it didn't have the same amount of spread. I think something like 500 people, little over 500 people died overall because of that. More have because of COVID. There's more cases because of COVID, and COVID spreads, and it's insidious because you can carry it, not show any symptoms, or the symptoms you had. Like, I remember going into this thinking like, oh, so what are the symptoms? Well, you're kind of tired, or you have a headache, maybe you have a little bit of nausea or some stomach pain, things like that. I'm thinking, I have that, from day to day, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a spring chicken anymore, so I feel aches in my bones, you know what I mean? I have sleep issues. I'm tired all the time. all the time. And there were sometimes, and I was in a period of time where we were doing a show. There was a lot of, I was working on 2 shows at the time, actually, and very physically exhausted just all of the time. Just all of the time. I was tired. I was burning the candle at both, So I'm thinking, at a certain point I was thinking, like I would have a day off and I would still feel tired, and I'd be like, am I tired because I'm just been working really hard, or am I COVID tired? I did like it was that kind of thing, right? It's insidious because you don't really know. The symptoms are so low key and so innocuous, but it kind of gets you on edge. And like I was talking again about the grocery store, even just being out at that grocery store, even just walking around doing some shopping, you felt gross. I came back home, I scrubbed up to my elbows just because, like, not even that anything was, just like the perception of everything was just, you become more aware of the things you're touching and germs and things like that. And I always had been before. I always try to avoid, touching door handles or on the subway, an old animation teacher taught me that you use your sleeve if you're grabbing onto something. You can wash your sleeve later, that kind of thing. But yeah, just you become more aware of just germs and disease and spread and how gross people are. It's not a blanket statement. It's not a value judgment. It's just we're gross. We're full of, we have bacteria all up in our body that help us function. It's just the way it is. But right now you just become really aware of it. It's such an interesting time. And never, like everybody's been saying this too. You never thought you would be living through this kind of a time. You never thought you would be living through these times where we're locked up and at home and stuff. But on my end, I feel like I've been able to be very productive. I've been able to focus on other things. I mean, I'm in the arts. I write a lot. I'm always organizing stuff. So it's been good. I've been able to still communicate and like talk about future projects with people and things going forward. If you don't, my heart really goes out to people who are struggling with depression and anxiety and isolation, because that's really hard. It's really hard. It can be really hard to reach out. So honestly, if you know people who are at risk, reach out to them, ask them how they're doing, just because they may not reach out to you. That's one of the insidious things about depression. You have it and you tend to keep it to yourself because you don't want to bother anybody. So people who are really hurting now, who really want help, really need help, they're not going to ask for it. So if you have anyone who you know is at risk, reach out. What's the worst thing that can happen is they say no, or they say I'm fine, or they don't respond. Like, just take a minute out of your day, reach out to somebody who you think might be in need in terms of mental health, in terms of like people who have physical disabilities and who can't get out, like, in general. Just reach out to them, reach out to friends, reach out to family, somebody you haven't seen, school friend you haven't seen in a long time. Just reach out, see how they're doing. You never know. The one tiny act of kindness could save someone's life. And I'm not being hyperbolic there at all. It's, you hear these stories all the time. Thank you for reaching out, for showing me your friendship. You saved my life there. So, that's enough of the COVID news. I don't want to do too much of this every day because it's going to get depressing for everybody involved, including myself. So we're going to talk about apocalyptic fiction. So I'm a big fan of apocalyptic fiction. One of my favorite courses in university was apocalyptic science fiction. Every day we'd begin, the professor would read the newspaper and we'd talk about all the headlines of impending doom. And there was never a shortage of that. I remember, that was around the time the Large Hadron Collider came about, and we were talking about, we're gonna make black holes that are gonna suck up the entire universe, and it's a microscopic black hole that exists, pops into existence, and then pops out of existence right again. It's like you can't do anything. Black hole is singularity, but you talk about the whole world is gonna get sucked up because of the Large Hadron Collider, and it was a good time. It was a fun time. But I love apocalyptic fiction. I don't know what it is about it. Apocalyptic fiction is, I don't know, it's amazing, because the kind of stories I like are the stories that show the lengths and breadths and extremes of humanity. So what I'm going to talk about, it's not strictly speaking apocalypse, but it is something that's been catching people's attention in terms of what they're consuming in terms of media, in terms of the apocalypse to start with. And this is something I want to talk about while it's relevant. It was number 7 in Netflix Canada last week. It's number 1 in Netflix Canada right now, and that's Tiger King. This documentary series. So to start off, so it's a story about people who own private zoos going to war. That's what it is. And it's been described as a redneck soap opera. I would say that's very accurate. It's full of some very colorful characters. It's full of it's all about rumor. It's all about rumor. It's all about, oh, this person, they killed their husband and they fed him to the tigers, you know, or like this person set their crocodile enclosure on fire so they could collect the insurance money. And it's all that. It's all salacious stuff. But here's the thing, they look at the rumors a lot and they never say outright, okay, this person actually did kill X, this person actually did hire a hitman too, but they explore kind of all the avenues, all the possibilities, and some of the real things about these people are weird. Probably the biggest smoking gun is the way all of these zoos treat their workers, which is like crap. One person doesn't even have workers, they're using volunteers who have to work over Christmas and things like that. One place, you know, the workers would be like transients who would like live on site, and they'd be like, oh, you know, this person is great, they're giving work to ex-cons, but then they're exploiting the ex-cons and only paying them $100 a week. And then, you know, the other places where people would work, you know, 12-hour days and barely get paid anything. I think it was also close to $100 a day. I think one place was like $57 a day or something. One place I think was $100 a week. I can't remember all the figures, but everybody was severely underpaid who worked for these establishments. And that's kind of the biggest smoking gun. You can see the temper of some of these people. You can see the competition of some of these people. Very big characters. 2 of them happen to be polyamorous, and so it's like just and like things like that are like, you know, kind of whatever. One guy was like a flamboyant gay guy. It's like, okay, whatever, but they're using every bit of color to pop into this documentary, anything that could be considered interesting. Of course, you get a lot of shots of the animals, the exotic animals, and that's kind of the thing. So the protagonist, the subject of this documentary, Joe Exotic, it centers a lot around Joe Exotic. It talks about Carol Baskin and some other people as well, but that's kind of the thing about this documentary. Its hook for you is the fact that its subject matter is the exotic, right? Everybody likes kind of the idea of zoos spark color. Right, I say the word zoo and you get images of all these colorful animals, and then you have these colorful characters and their colorful costumes and their tiger print suits and their furs and their sequins and things like that. And these people are all performers and they all have big personalities and things like that. So the thing about this documentary is it's very annoyingly edited. Not that in that it's bad, in that it's a little too effective. So I'm not sure how balanced it is, but it is very good at presenting a side and then immediately presenting another side. So when I was talking about all the worker abuses and things like that, so that happens in succession, where they compare it between 3 different zoos and how the workers are treated in this one section of the documentary. And when they're talking about the first person and how they're not even paying people and the cages are crap and the animals are not cared for and things are overgrown and it's still selling merchandise and things like that, you think, oh, this person's the worst person in the world. Then they turn around to someone else and they're like, okay, look at how they're luring in like women, and they kind of have this harem of people who start working for them and they don't get paid and things like that, and they work these long days, and then all the women coming in, the zoo owner changes their name and things like that, and you think, oh, this guy's the worst one ever. But then you go to the last guy, and it's like, oh yeah, he's giving the jobs to the ex-cons and things like that, and then making them live in crappy trailers, and there's lice everywhere, and they're barely getting anything a week, and then you have footage of him yelling at them. So the documentary, essentially the way it's edited, it kind of builds up your expectation on things and then subverts it. It's like Rian Johnson directed this. No, that was a cheap shot. I actually did quite like The Last Jedi. I like it even more now after seeing The Rise of whatever it was called, The Rise of Nobody Wants to Be in Star Wars anymore, because Disney doesn't know what the heck they're doing. And Knives Out. Knives Out was brilliant. Go see Knives Out. That's another great. It's a murder mystery. You watch it at home. It's good. All the twists and stuff are good. I could go on about Knives Out. Knives Out is great. Kind of reestablished. Rian Johnson did Looper. You guys like Looper. He's a good director. He's a director with a vision. Every time he makes a movie, you can tell he wants to say something or explore something. J.J. Abrams is beige. He's the color beige. But that's my side diversion about Star Wars, which I'm gonna do a podcast with a friend of mine in a little while. I think tomorrow night we're recording it, so I'm gonna get all into Disney Star Wars. Don't you worry. But back to Tiger King. I mean, I remember Joe Exotic from the John Oliver, where it was talking about third-party candidates. I remember that. I remember, like, as soon as I heard the name, I remembered. You don't forget the name, Joe Exotic. So, yeah, the documentary is not, I mean, a documentary is not fact, right? It's an essay. It's an essay where it presents its arguments. And it does do a good job of kind of skewering everybody, but, I mean, it is very emotionally manipulative. I'll say that. A lot of people have accused, Michael Moore documentaries of being that. I think there's some merit to that. There's some not merit to that. Michael Moore doesn't show the other side so much. But that said, the things that he's presenting are generally pretty factual. Like, he may not be showing the full side of the coin, but the side of the coin you're seeing is not obscured. There clearly what it is. That's clearly what you're looking at. With this documentary, not so much. And part of that is because they're talking about rumor. They're talking about things where there isn't hard proof. I'm a big fan of true crime. I love true crime podcasts. I love Small Town Murder. I've seen like every major true crime documentary you can pretty much think of. I love the OJ one. Making a Murderer was great. I couldn't really get into Making a Murderer 2, but that's, you're kind of dealing with a cold case then. It had some interesting elements there. But The Mind of Aaron Hernandez, Ted Bundy tapes was fantastic. Oh man, what a ride. Amanda Knox, all of these things. I'm fascinated by the extremes of humanity. So true crime is really interesting. And I like it because, unlike a murder mystery, which can be poorly written, unless you're Rian Johnson, it's all interesting because it's all real. That's the big give. I love nonfiction. I love a good mystery, and true crime brings that full circle. And I love psychology. I love human psychology. So it's interesting to see how the minds of people work. And I follow channels on YouTube that cover that and all that stuff as well. But this is less of a true crime documentary. There are some litigious things that happen in it. There is jail time that happens in it. There are some questionable activities. There's no real smoking gun, I would say, which isn't a problem. If you watched Making a Murderer and you walked away thinking, I don't really know if this guy did it or not, I don't think that's a problem. I think that the purpose of a documentary, a good true crime documentary where there isn't a smoking gun, is to get you thinking about it. But yeah, it's interesting because, what is it called? Criminal Genius or Sheer Criminal Genius, something like that. No, that's my friend's play. I think Criminal Mastermind. I can't remember what it is. It's the one where the guy has the explosive collar and he blows. That was interesting, but that was where the person did it the whole time. What's another good one? The Jinx. The Jinx is a good one, but the Jinx is one where even when it comes to the damning indictment at the end, where it's going. It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear what the culpability is. This one, not so much. And not so much because there is so much rumor. There is so much talking. Oh, this person killed their husband and, buried them. And there is suspicious stuff. Don't get me wrong. All of these people are doing suspicious stuff. Really, the asterisk on this documentary series is that all these people are horrible. And it's interesting that private zoo ownership and private pet ownership breeds a certain type of person. These people are all horrible, but they're also all horrible to each other and the people around them. And they're very much of the same type. Like, just the fact that 2 out of the 3 zookeepers they look at, I think they look at 4 actually overall. There's one's more of a private pet owner, but they look at 4. But I mean, 2 out of the 4 of them are in kind of one-sided open relationships. It's almost like they're collecting people like they do animals. And I'm not saying anything against that form of life, like far from it, like just how whatever you do to be happy. But definitely all of them have elements, all of them, even where there isn't that kind of relationship thing with the owners, all of them have a cultish thing about them. They all have, they have their YouTube videos and their personalities, and the one person would get on camera and be like, "Hi, you crazy cats and kittens," and they'd have their following and their followers, and other people would have their followers, and they treat the people who work for them almost like followers as well. There are cultish aspects to all of this. It's weird. The idea of ownership, and that's the thing too, like, I think if I had, not that I would, because it's really stupid and you shouldn't ever own big cats, because a big cat will kill you. It'll kill you. It's just a matter of time. It's just, don't own large exotic cats. Just freaking don't do that. It's bad. It's going to eat your face. It's going to eat your children. It's stupid to do so. Even people who train them and are good with them, sometimes there's a worker in this movie, I think her name's Staff. Yeah, Staff. She seems pretty cool, actually. A lot of the workers seem like pretty cool people, but a lot of the people kind of involved in the private zoo game, they're all just horrible. But Staff looks pretty cool, and just she's a zoo worker, was really into her job and everything like that. And then one day, from accident, bit her hand off. A week later, she's back on the job. So even when you know what you're doing, things happen. Bad things happen even when you know what you're doing. So it's a wild animal. It's a wild animal. Steve Irwin, how many times did he do something dangerous? And then it was a manta ray or a stingray. I can't remember which one, but it was a rayfish that stabbed him in the chest. Just a freak accident. It's a guy who'd been careful around animals all his life, but he said himself, every time I go in there, it's a risk. Every time I go in there with a wild, dangerous animal, I am taking my life in my hands. He knew and he understood the risk. So even when you know what you're doing, bad things can happen. But if you're treating this wild animal like a pet, it is going to eat your face. And like, can you blame a cat for meowing? Like, you can't. Like, it's your own fault at that point. I'm sorry, it's your own fault. You've just signed yourself up for your own Darwin Award. It is so stupid. And I've been watching documentary. I'll say this as well, because things like big cat ownership and things like that. I've watched Animal Hoarders, and there's a great documentary I watched maybe 10 years ago called Big Cat Crisis that was about this as well. There's a good documentary I watched called For the Birds, and it was, while she kept fowl, I don't think she kept emus. She kept geese and chickens and turkeys and basically livestock, but they overtook her life. She was completely concerned by these birds. Everything was a mess. Everything was dirty. That is an animal hoarding documentary that has a bit of an uplifting ending. I would highly recommend that documentary, actually. It's a really good one, and unlike a lot of these, it doesn't end on that downer note. There is some positivity that comes out of it. It's very sad in parts, but you also empathize with the people in here. I'm not empathizing with any of these people. I think some of what they're doing is kind of amazing. Like, they create these worlds in their heads, and like the Tiger King literally believes he's the king of the Tiger Kingdom. They create their own world. They do create these enterprises. A lot of them are con artists, and they're very good at manipulating people. They're definitely very determined individuals, and like, I'll respect that about them. Everything else, probably not. These are just some horrible human beings, and they treat animals like crap. They treat animals and people like crap, and the quality of the life of the people who work for them and the animals in their care is in dire question. There's questions about animal euthanasia after an animal stops being profitable for many of them. It's dubious at best. So it's a documentary that doesn't give you any answers, not that it needs to, but it's a documentary that also plays with and sways with your expectations. And what I don't like about it is it's edited to do so. It's edited to keep you as an audience member just never really knowing what it is you're looking at. And again, you have to keep in your mind that a lot of what's being talked about is rumor. And I think it's an interesting exploration of rumors and how they spread, and how the rumors around this specific community of feuding private zoo owners is so insidious. I do think that is fascinating. But just to talk about how it's edited to be emotionally manipulative, and that's kind of what my big issue with it is. So the whole movie is about people. It's about these characters. It's about these personalities. That's the focus. And then at the very end, there's an image of a tiger walking through the jungle, and there's this majestic music playing, and oh, what about the tigers in the wild, and they're not allowed to be tigers, and it maybe lasts for a minute or 30 seconds, but right at the end there, they're like, we got to slap on an environmental message and play some sappy music over it. That's just... No, if you're going to make a documentary about Joe Exotic, make a documentary about Joe Exotic. Don't give me this half, because that's the thing. Like, I watched the Jane Goodall documentary. It's like, yeah, her heart's in it. When she says, we got to protect the environment because I've lived in it, I've worked with these animals, and our planet is dying, and so are these populations, I believe it. When you're talking to me about Joe Exotic's last lover, and then you slap on a message at the end about... let's save the tiger. Like it's completely baffling, and it's done there just to sway the audience at the last moment, and it's very palpable. If you see, and the thing about it is, I love documentary. I watch it again and again and again and again, but like even sometimes I'll be suckered in by a documentary and be like, oh, there's a part in your brain that just kind of assumes this is fact because it's presented as a documentary. It's fact. But I mean, you have to treat it as a video essay. You can't treat documentary as truth. And I think a lot of people will. I think a lot of people will see this and just be like, Carol Baskin killed her husband and stuffed it in the septic tank. Or, Joe Exotic hired a hitman to kill such and such and such, and ignore all the things that don't make sense about it and the things that don't add up. Like, I'm not saying any, it is about rumor. And even though there's credence to some of these rumors, and even though some of the timelines are dubious, the fact that, Carol Baskin's husband disappeared, and then she gleaned all of this from it disappearing, his disappearance, etc., etc. But still, you don't have a smoking gun. You can't treat what's presented here as fact. I'm not saying the filmmakers were necessarily trying to do this, but I'm saying the way they presented it, where they're so obviously trying to sway emotions, and they are good at it. There were times where they got me to actually care about Joe Exotic. I shouldn't care about him. He's a horrible human being. He's a horrible man. But there were times when they were able to portray him in a light where I was kind of like, oh, I'm kind of sad. There's a moment in the documentary series where he's all alone. He doesn't have a friend in the world. And I kind of feel sad just watching that as a human being. Like, it's horrible to be alone and not have anybody to rely on, like whoever you are. So, but it's presented with this like sad music and these voiceovers, and you hear him from prison and all that stuff. It's kind of like, it's so, that's the thing. Like, if you're not used to watching documentaries, you don't realize how obvious this is. Like, if you don't consume documentaries regularly, like we can tell when a movie is fake, right? But I mean, with a documentary, because it's based on fact, we tend to treat it as exactly fact. I think this documentary series is emotionally manipulative enough that it'll seem that way. I compare it to something like Making a Murderer. Making a Murderer certainly had a bias, but it wore that bias on its sleeve, and it was very clear about what it did. And the amazing thing about Making a Murderer was the access they had to all of this information, all of this material. This was also at a time where in true crime documentaries, you didn't necessarily have that level of access. OJ Made in America came out after, I believe, and even then they didn't have they didn't interview Johnny Cochran in that. Like, there was like nothing from Johnny Cochran or Johnny Cochran's estate in that. So I'm like, what's going on here? You didn't, like, it's the main man. What's going on? But you think they would have gotten some like prior interview footage or something like that, but he doesn't appear. So like the access in Making a Murderer, like the fact that they had access to this defense team and it was basically an open book, like that was fascinating in and of itself. Just the level of access they had to the defense team and to the Avery family and things like that. It was definitely very biased, but it was also very open in the things it was showing. There were some, like, when people were complaining about facts that were left out, some of it was dubious. Why did they leave out, the sweat analysis and things like that? Why did they leave out certain parts of evidence? But like, I mean, in trying to put together a 10-hour documentary, some things get left out. In many aspects, it was very thorough. It was very clear. And oftentimes they would just let footage play and they would just let you kind of decide for yourself what was going on. I've heard talks after that documentary came out where people were discussing on YouTube and they'd be like, no, he's got to be guilty because of this. Yeah, but you forgot about that thing. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. And then there's that other thing that was weird. Oh yeah, that's right. And going back and forth. And that's good. It just kind of presents it for you. I think that's a better made documentary. And I think part of it is to do with the style. Obviously, the subject matter of Making a Murderer was more serious. It wasn't really, let's laugh at these people. That's very much what's happening in Tiger King. And I'm not saying it's not an unnatural thing, because these characters are larger than life. They very much were. Personalities in Making a Murderer as well. You get the Ken Crass, the defense counsel. He had a big personality. He had a big effect on the case. The two defense counsel lawyers, they had their personalities. They became like champions of the people, and people were like Dean Strang and Jeff Beauty. People obsessed about them, but they were just being themselves on camera. Honestly, they came across very naturally. It was just kind of like what they represented, almost. So you get, and Avery, of course, is a very interesting personality in and of itself, and Brandon Dassey, but there didn't seem to be anything performative there when all of these private zoo owners are entertainers, and by fact of their nature, are performers. So half of the time you're looking at a performance. It's not that the documentary series doesn't acknowledge that, but I do think it colors the tone to be more comedic, even when they're talking about murder and people losing their houses and litigation and animal abuse and unnecessary animal euthanasia and worker abuse and things like that. So, I mean, I don't think a serious tone necessarily would have done well, but I do think this documentary is a little more flippant than something like Making a Murderer, where they kind of just wanted to present this as is and put it out there. And obviously it was edited. Obviously they're biased, but their bias wasn't necessarily, like, they even had footage of the defense counsel saying, what do you think? Do you think Stephen Avery is guilty? And it was Dean Strang they asked that to, and Dean Strang said, I don't know, but I hope he is, because for him to go to prison twice for crimes he didn't commit is unimaginable. And that's kind of the footnote. The footnote of that documentary series is not necessarily whether or not he did it, but just looking at how, even if he did it, it was not processed in a just manner. Justice was not followed to the letter or the spirit of the law in this case. There are a lot of things that were dubious at best, and it's kind of asking people to look more at that system. Whatever your opinion is on Stephen Avery's culpability, that really much was, and the documentarian said that as well after the fact. This is what we want your takeaway to be, not really, is he guilty, is he not, even though I think they were kind of siding that way. I mean, they were working with the defense counsel, who were in the habit of defending, were paid to defend him, so they would lean that way naturally. But looking at it more of, and not that there wasn't credence for that as well, but I do think that it was more about the miscarriage of justice rather than, he's innocent, let him go free. And interesting things happened after the documentary. The online community got together and they found someone else who was there that whole time and had a history of killing women, who matched up with the timeline. They found another guy who died shortly after, so it's forever going to be a mystery. But the online community got together and they found another solution. That's amazing. That's incredible. It was so neat when I read about that. And it wasn't like a piecemeal. Oh, we're just looking for like it's like no, this actually matches up. Like it's incredible. Again, no definitive answers here, and we'll never get them because the suspect in question has passed away. But yeah, just the fact that they were able to find another guy who fit the timeline, who fit the MO, just all coming from that community. Like, wow, like why wasn't this guy brought into questioning? They basically brought one guy into questioning and then ended up finding him guilty. Not that that doesn't happen. I mean, but you know, but that's the thing. I think that was a better made series, and I think a series like Tiger King wouldn't exist without something like Making a Murderer. I think Making a Murderer really set the precedent. You wouldn't have Criminal Mastermind. You wouldn't have Ted Bundy tapes. You wouldn't have any of that stuff. I mean, Ted Bundy was famous way before anybody had ever heard of Stephen Avery or Teresa Halbach or that whole affair. But because of what was done there, because of the access they had to the defense team, because of all this other access they had to the Avery family, because of the way they were able to present the picture, it made documentary into bingeable TV. And that was, I have not seen that since, like, I don't know, even Planet Earth, I wouldn't say people necessarily binged. Even something like The Corporation, which was a big, like, it was a 3-part series, but it was kind of a big deal when it came out at the time. It was kind of like, here's an indictment of the modern corporation before it became part of common lexicon. I mean, people had always talked, big bad corporation, that's a trope, but really getting into the nitty gritty of, no, corporations are considered a person, and that's a problem. So that's a really good documentary as well. That's a really good. I think it's either a 2-part or a 3-part. But anyway, the point essentially being that it kind of set the precedent for what a true crime documentary series could be and how it could be consumed. We're seeing the same, and I think Netflix was right for that. And it's right for something like Tiger King. Would it have been as popular without COVID, without people stuck at home? I don't know. It is very watchable. I'll say that. In terms of being a piece of entertainment, it's very entertaining because these characters are entertaining. And I'll say this for it, as much as I talk about rumor and the performative aspect, and, I don't know how much of this is all true. It's a documentary, it's a video essay. Take it with a grain of salt. Some of these things are too bizarre not to be, like, some of these things are so bizarre that, again, have been made up. Speaking as both a fiction and a nonfiction writer, nonfiction is a much better writer than any writer could ever be. I'll put it that way. Anything I can come up with in my brain and get out onto a page is not going to be nearly as compelling as anything real life has to offer. There's a few authors who do fiction better than real life, but even they are still drawing from. I mean, George R. R. Martin is still drawing from real sources. I think he makes a history that's a little more interesting than the actual history, having looked into both. But it's probably because he's compiling from a whole bunch of different histories. But, like, even there's a precedent. Even there's a real life precedent. So, so it's one of those things where I'm wondering how much of this is legit. And that's always a good way to interpret anything, interpret a news article, interpret anything in our world, really, is to be critical of it. But it's good, but it's not great, I guess I would say. I liked it. It's entertaining. I like it a lot in terms of the subject matter. I like true crime. I like character studies. I like documentaries on big cat crises. I love documentaries on private exotic pet ownership. That's something I've been interested in the documentary sphere for a long time. It's just fascinating. Animal hoarding is fascinating. And again, it's like, I think if I ever owned a tiger, like, not that I would, but if I ever owned a tiger, I would stop at one tiger. These people just collect and collect and collect. These are living things. It's like, I mean, I got a pet. I got a cat. Do I want another cat? Maybe. I'd get another cat. I don't have the urge for it right now. Would I get 3 cats? No. Why would I get 3 cats? I got 2 cats. But why do you need 10 tigers? You got 1 tiger. Why don't you just stop at 1 tiger? Why do you need all the tigers? It's insane. Like, you're hoarding these living things. It's insane. Like, these people are. There is something off. There's got to be something wrong with you when you're collecting living things like that. I mean, it's so odd to me, and I think it's odd to a lot of people. But it's like I do think there is something mentally is going on where some of these and that's the thing where we're talking about securing them too. I think some of these people need some help. Honestly, when it becomes a private zoo, that's one thing because at least it's a business. At least you're trying to blah blah blah. But a lot of these people's with their private zoo, it's basically their animal collection that they're turning into a way to make money. And then when they turn it into a money-making idea, it becomes just like any business, and it corrupts, and the animal care goes down, and worker care goes down, and all that. We see that happen pretty much across the board in this thing. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's just there's a lot in here. There's a lot to sink your teeth into, your tiger teeth into. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. But there again, it was a little emotionally manipulative. I would have preferred if sometimes they had just kind of shown something. A lot of times they're editing back and forth between conversations, and it's done in a way to kind of like subvert your expectations and play with the information you're learning. And I don't find it's balanced. I find it's deliberately misleading in places. At least that's what it felt like for me, from somebody who's watched a buttload of documentaries. I would have liked something that was a little more, I guess, less edited in a way. I think this is over-edited, and sometimes the way it's edited is very annoying. It's very annoying when you hear one person say something, then one person contradict them, then another person contradict them, and that's done deliberately to, like, where you're not getting a full picture, you're just getting a sound bite, and then a sound bite that contradicts it, and then another sound bite that contradicts it. So those are my problems with the documentary. I'd still recommend it. I'd still recommend you checking it out. But yeah, just kind of be aware of those editing tricks, because it does try to lull you into a false sense of security at times. And be aware of, just be aware of, this is a documentary about rumor. It's a documentary about unfounded rumor. There's credence to some of them. There's things that discredit others, but it's talking about how crazy private zoo owners are, how mad their behavior is, and how they just generate these rumors and wild stories, and how they feud and how they go to war. And it's about the crazy world of private zoo owners and just what horrible people they are. And that's it's worth checking out. It is worth checking out, but bear those in mind. It's not a perfect series by any means. It doesn't reach the standard of something like Making a Murderer, which is, top in terms of true crime documentaries. But it is well produced. I guess it is well put together. But those kind of little manipulative tricks, just be aware of them. And again, take everything with a grain of salt. You should be doing that anyway, just in life, just to be a good, skeptical, rational human being. But I mean, just take everything here with a grain of salt. This is a constructed piece of entertainment, and it is entertaining. It absolutely is entertaining. But it's entertainment based about the real life of rumors. So so that's something that people are consuming during the apocalypse. I'm going to do more of these. I'm probably going to talk more about actual apocalyptic fiction. I got some movies I want to talk about that actually focus on an apocalypse. But I think it was interesting. I didn't want to do something like Contagion, where it's really on the nose. I saw Contagion years ago on a plane. It looked pretty good. I have no desire to revisit it now. It's a little on the nose. There's the Spanish flu documentary going around. I might check that out. But there's some other apocalyptic movies I'd like to talk about and share on here. And yeah, that's essentially what the format's going to be. We're going to talk a little bit about COVID news, and then we're going to talk a little bit about apocalyptic movies and apocalyptic fiction. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and stay scruffy looking, Nerf herders. Cheers.